I think that the issue of climate change in Africa, and I can speak primarily from Kenya, but I think it's the same challenge over many of the more developing parts of Africa, that the amount of information and the quality of the information is very limited. When I'm going to start at the highest level, just the general public. In our countries, there is almost no information about climate change through the traditional media, newspapers or television, radio, because most of the news is very political, and often when there is bad news, it's treated as if it's something that is external to Africa, that this is a problem caused by the West. Climate change, emissions, ozone, all these things are not really seen as a problem caused by African countries. In fact, on the contrary, in most African countries and most African people are being advised that the future and our aspirations can only be achieved if we go the route of developed nations, and particularly very, very rapidly growing emerging countries like China or India, Brazil, that we should be doing much more industry, and our national values and our plans, like our master plan for Vision 2030, is really hinged on development, infrastructure, industry. What we've seen is a very downplaying of matters related to climate change, and elevation of any matters that might address job creation or GDP increase. And this idea that GDP is the end goal is something that we hear about a lot. The costs of these developments are I think we don't hear about the long-term consequences of the construction of coal power plants, for example. We've seen efforts in East Africa now to establish a coal economy. Our country in Kenya, most of our energy is actually comes from much more sustainable sources. Hydroelectricity, geothermal is huge, wind power and solar power. But we're seeing a move by industry being financed by big banks, especially Chinese, to build coal power plants. And not only is the information incorrect that we need this kind of power, but the quality of this technology is another part of the problem. That the technology that we're being sold is the latest, the most advanced, and the cleanest possibly coal power there is out there. You know, it's misinformation at the highest level. It's coming from government, and it's coming through the big industrialists in the country. And the efforts by conservationists to challenge this are being dismissed. What we see in schools when it comes to children, you know, basically it's a vacuum of information. Children are not given education around climate change and the sources of climate change. Instead, this information is more around to solve these problems, all you've got to do is plant some trees. Everybody should go out there and plant trees. And if you look at Kenya's climate agenda, it's all about planting more trees. If we had 10% of our country in tree cover, then we'll be fine. In fact, if you look at what's happening in terms of sources of climate vulnerability, the vulnerability of people in Africa is very high. Already they are poor. Already we don't have very well forested areas, especially here in Kenya. We're losing our forests at a rate of about 7% per year, humid forests. But there's a great effort to plant trees, but there isn't a great effort to stop the destruction of forests. Instead, what we're seeing is more development in our forest areas and arguments being pushed as to why we need to do this. Most of the time, and if you look at the Big Four agenda for my country, which the whole country has supported, it's related to industry and industry development. Why? Because this generates jobs. We need jobs because our population demographic is very young. We have 1 million young people looking for jobs every year. The industry will give them these jobs. If you look at the environmental sector, which actually can create a lot of jobs, you don't see much priority placed on that. And these are the kind of challenges that we hear about. We don't hear about our role and responsibility towards climate change. And we also don't hear about the need for climate adaptation and climate mitigation in a way that is making a lot of sense. We don't hear about the costs, the real costs of climate, and these developments that are altering the climate, for example, on agriculture and food security, or on health and the cost of health in our countries.